Welcome to Echo Tales. The champagne glass remained in her hand as I slipped away. She was mid-sentence, recounting some amusing anecdote about my mistaking almond milk for body wash. Laughter erupted around her, and she bathed in it, a spotlight on her performance. I didn't make a sound. I just stood, straightened my jacket, and walked out through the garden gate, past the flickering tiki torches and the sound of laughter that wasn't for me. Not a soul noticed. Not even her. I reached my car without anyone calling my name. I opened the door, sat down, stared at the steering wheel for a full minute. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just gripped the leather so hard I thought it might tear. Then I started driving. Not home. Not to a friend's place. I didn't even check the map. I just drove. I remember her laugh echoing in my head. The way she tossed her hair back when she delivered her lines. That perfectly coiffed, fake polished humor she wore like perfume meant to charm strangers and quietly, methodically, destroy me. The joke she told was rehearsed. It always was. She'd used it at brunch once with her coworkers. The punchline? He thought oat milk came from shaking oatmeal. She'd said I married a walking dad joke. Except this time it wasn't brunch. It was a party packed with people she respected, people whose opinions she craved. And she presented them my dignity like a disposable party favor. When did I become her anecdote? That night marked something I hadn't seen coming. Not because the joke was cruel, but because of how casually she told it. Like I was a sitcom character, a convenient prop in a show that didn't require my consent. And the worst part, I laughed with her the first few times. I enabled it. I normalized it. I let her turn me into this harmless, goofy, fumbling version of myself, because I thought that's what love was. Letting your partner shine, even if you dim a little in the process. But I wasn't just dimming. I was actively fading, disappearing. That night, I checked into a tiny roadside inn with flickering hallway lights and a front desk clerk who didn't even look up. I handed him my card, signed a receipt, and sat on the edge of a lumpy mattress, wondering if anyone else had ever walked out of a party and grasped, with a chilling clarity, that they might never truly come back. Not just to that party, but to the entire life I'd built, waiting just beyond that door. She still hadn't texted, not one call, not a single "Where are you?" And that profound silence spoke volumes, articulating more than any apology ever could. This isn't a revenge story. I'm not out for drama or payback. I'm just a man who left quietly and started asking himself, if no one notices when you're gone, were you ever really there at all? I didn't go back the next morning. I didn't even check my phone. It was still on silent in my glove compartment, buried beneath a stack of receipts and an old parking ticket I never paid. I sat at the tiny desk in the motel room, staring out the window at a half-empty parking lot and a gas station sign that blinked erratically, one burnout letter hanging broken, as if it too had finally given up on explaining itself. I remembered the way her voice danced through the air when she told those jokes, how her eyes sparkled, not from joy, but from approval. She thrived on reactions. The louder the applause, the deeper the cut. She didn't even need to look at me anymore. I was merely the material, disposable, all too familiar. At some point, I stopped being a person in her stories and became the punchline she warmed up the room with. That realization didn't come all at once. It came in pieces, like the time her friend asked, "Wait, is it the guy who burned the garlic bread 3 times in 1 week?" And Alara giggled. "Yep, that's my resident chef." Or the time I tripped over the dog bed, face-planting during a dinner party, and she promptly posted it online with the caption, "My husband, the graceful ninja." Hundreds of likes poured in. Even her boss commented with a laughing emoji. I never minded being laughed at when it was between us. That kind of intimacy, the shared giggle under a blanket or the snort over a burnt pancake, that used to mean something. But now, the laughter never softened into a kiss. Instead, it was a prelude to her turning away, already plotting the next, more cutting story to tell at my expense. I stayed away for 2 days. She either genuinely didn't notice, or she did, and simply chose not to care. On the 3rd day, I drove back, not to return, but to look her in the eyes without saying a word, and see if there was anything left worth salvaging. I parked down the block and waited outside the house in my car. The lights were on in the kitchen. She was on a video call, laughing again. I watched her through the window. The same practiced smile, the same familiar head tilt, the same perfectly calibrated laugh. For a moment, I imagined walking in, sitting across from her, and saying, "Hey, remember me?" But I didn't. Instead, I did something that even now feels surreal. I got out of the car, walked up to the porch, and quietly slid my wedding ring into the anodyne emptiness of the mailbox. No note, no drama, just that one potent symbol of everything I'd poured into us, and everything she had so casually taken for granted. I turned and walked away. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed for the first time. A single message from her. "Why is your ring in the mailbox?" I didn't respond because suddenly she wanted answers. Suddenly, the silence wasn't comfortable anymore. By the fourth day, I realized I wasn't just avoiding her. I was conducting an unwitting test. I was waiting, with a morbid curiosity, to see how long it would take before she actually cared enough to truly look for me. Not just text a question, not just throw a passive-aggressive comment into the void, but really look. But she didn't. There are no missed calls, no frantic voicemails, no banging on my friend's door, or even a knock at my office. Just one short message about the ring, then silence. What she didn't know was that I hadn't left town. I didn't run off to the mountains or vanish into some self-discovery retreat like the movies show. No, I stayed close. I watched her. I needed to see who she became when she thought I was gone. That Friday night, I parked across the street in a borrowed car and waited. Around 8 p.m., a sleek black sedan glided to a stop. Alara emerged. Cloaked in that crimson blazer she reserved exclusively for impressing important figures. She looked effortlessly, painstakingly perfect. But what truly gutted me was her expression. Light, utterly carefree, like a teenager sneaking out, not a wife grappling with the sudden, inexplicable disappearance of her husband. A man stepped out of the car and opened the passenger door for her, tall, sharp-suited, and disturbingly comfortable. She laughed, a loud, familiar sound, and lightly touched his arm, a gesture so natural, so accustomed, as if she'd done it countless times before. My stomach churned, twisting into a knot of something ugly and primal, but I remained frozen. They didn't go far, just to some trendy tapas bar we used to pass on our evening walks. I followed on foot, maintaining a careful distance, watching through the condensation-fogged window as they clinked glasses, leaning in close like old conspirators. At one point, she reached across the table, her fingers brushing his wrist, then threw her head back in uninhibited laughter. That exact, unforgettable movement. I knew it. It was her signature, the identical gesture she'd used the very first time she uttered those words. "I love you," at a Waffle House of all places. They stayed for over an hour. I stood across the street in the cold, unmoving, watching my marriage dissolve one sip at a time. I felt no rage, no impulse to storm in. I simply absorbed and memorized every searing detail. The delicate curve of her smile, the familiar rhythm of her gestures, the precise second she ceased to be someone who was mine. When they came out, she kissed him, not on the lips, on the cheek. But it wasn't innocent. It was an intimacy I hadn't experienced from her in years. She lingered, as if trying to prolong a fleeting, cherished feeling. He placed his hand on the small of her back and walked her to the car. She didn't resist. She didn't look over her shoulder. She didn't even glance around to check if anyone might see. She thought I was gone, and that made her bold. But I wasn't gone. I was watching. And for the first time, with a jolt of bitter clarity, I realized that perhaps I had been watching this entire marriage unfold from the outside all along. Anyway, a spectator in my own life. The man in the background of her story. The unwitting fool applauding at jokes crafted entirely at his own expense. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the car outside the same motel thinking. Not about revenge, not even about betrayal, just about the truth. The small, stark, undeniable truth that twisted my gut more than any act of betrayal could. She had already moved on. The party joke was just the final confirmation. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I went back to her house. Not a walk-in, not to talk, just to see it, to remind myself what it looked like when you gave everything you had to someone who didn't even bother to notice when you disappeared. The porch light, still flickering, a minor fault I'd offered to fix just 2 weeks prior. "Don't bother," she dismissed. "It's not that serious." My help was no longer desired. Unless, of course, there was an audience to witness my ineptitude. I parked a few houses down and just sat there gripping the steering wheel like I was preparing for a storm. My heart thudded in a slow, exhausted rhythm, the kind that no longer knew panic, only a dull, persistent ache. I watched as she stepped out around 11 a.m. dressed in leggings and a loose hoodie, her hair tied back like she had nowhere important to be. She looked normal, casual, like a Saturday morning meant for errands or yoga. No trace of remorse, no hint of chaos, just her going about life, as if the man who once slept beside her hadn't vanished without a whisper of explanation. She pulled out of the driveway and didn't look back. Of course, she didn't. Why would she? But I followed quietly. I desperately needed to understand the source of her profound peace, for it certainly hadn't originated from me. First stop, a coffee shop, the same one we used to go to every Sunday before she started preferring her me time. I watched from the opposite end of the lot as she ordered, smiled at the barista, even took a selfie while waiting. That smile, it wasn't ours anymore. It hadn't been for quite some time. The way her eyes lit up for the camera, the effortless way she posed with her latte, it hit me harder than that kiss on the cheek ever did. Because this version of Alara, the one smiling to herself, for herself, was utterly unrecognizable to me. She wasn't broken. She wasn't worried. She wasn't searching the crowd for me. She was free. And somehow, that stark, unburdened freedom resonated louder than every cruel joke she had ever cracked at my expense. She didn't go to meet anyone that day. She went home, stopped to pick up a few things from a store, even watered the plants on the porch before going back inside. She was alone, and still she didn't reach out. Not once. Not even a, "Hey, were you really?" Not even a follow-up to the ring. That small, potent circle of metal had likely been casually tossed into a drawer by now, buried beneath forgotten mail and other meaningless detritus. That night, I meticulously transcribed every detail, every observed second, every buried feeling, every instance I had laughed off an insult, apologized for being boring, or begged for intimacy, as if it were a privilege, not a fundamental right. I wrote until my fingers cramped and my eyes blurred. I needed to see the truth on paper because it was easier to confront when it wasn't trapped in my head. The truth was simple. She had already let go. Long before the party, long before the closet, long before the jokes started turning cruel. I had simply been too desperate to cling to the illusion and ignore the widening cracks that had been forming. But no more. The next time I saw her, I wouldn't be watching. I'd be ready. Not to fight for her, not to make her laugh again, but to say the one thing I never had the courage to say out loud. You don't get to smile at me anymore, as if I still belong to you. I didn't expect her to show up at my office. Not after a week of silence. Not after she'd been perfectly content living like I was a ghost. But that Friday, just as I was closing my laptop and reaching for my coat, I saw her reflection in the glass of the door, hair pulled back, face tight with confusion, like she was rehearsing an apology she hadn't yet convinced herself of. I didn't say anything. I didn't even move. I just watched her from the inside as she hesitated outside, biting her lip like the victim in a scene she didn't know how to play. She knocked once, a soft, hesitant tap. I opened the door halfway. Her voice was light, casual, like this wasn't the first time we'd seen each other in days. "You've been ignoring me," she accused, her eyes darting around the room behind me, as if expecting to find someone else hidden there. "I left," I replied flatly. She blinked. "Yeah, I noticed. What's going on with you?" That question, "What's going on with you?" As if I were the unstable one. As if I had unilaterally decided to transform this marriage into a Cold War. I didn't answer. I just let the silence stretch until she filled it with nervous chatter. "Look," she said, stepping inside. "If this is about the party thing, I was just joking. You always used to laugh with me about that stuff." "I used to pretend to laugh," I said quietly. "You simply never noticed." A flicker of hurt crossed her face, but it vanished almost instantly. Then she folded her arms like she was preparing for a debate. "So now you're punishing me, just vanishing like some emo teenager?" That sentence cracked something in me. After all the dismissiveness, all the jokes, now I was an emo teenager. I almost laughed, but I didn't. I just looked her straight in the eye and said, "You made me invisible long before I left." I just finally acted like it. She flinched. For a moment, I thought maybe that would be it, that she'd storm out, slam the door, and never look back. But she didn't. Instead, she did something I hadn't seen her do in years. She got quiet. She actually sat down, looked uncomfortable, and asked, "Did I really make you feel like that?" I searched for a response within myself. Relief, perhaps, or a sliver of hope. But there was only an encompassing numbness. Because this wasn't an awakening. It wasn't regret. It was the first time she had to confront something without being able to laugh it away. "I gave you everything I had," I said. "You gave everyone else my dignity." She opened her mouth, closed it again, then finally said, "So what now?" "I don't know," I confessed. "But for once, I'm not rushing to fix it." She stood up slowly. "Are you staying somewhere safe?" I nodded. She looked at me for a long time, like she was trying to see a version of me she hadn't paid attention to in years. "You look different," she finally said. "Maybe I am." That night, I didn't cry. I didn't replay the conversation in my head on a loop like I used to when we'd argue. And I needed to figure out where I went wrong. I just lay in bed staring at the ceiling, knowing for the first time that I hadn't gone wrong. I hadn't changed. I had simply stopped shrinking myself. And as strange as it sounds, I slept better than I had in months. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't yelling or demanding or trying to win. Sometimes it's just walking away and truly, profoundly meaning it. The following weekend, I receive an invitation. Not a message, not a call, not even a knock on my door. An actual envelope, cream-colored, thick, and hand-delivered to the front desk of my temporary apartment. No return address, just my name written in a handwriting I knew too well. Inside was a simple card. Dinner, Saturday night, just us. Beneath that, her name. No audience. I stare at it for a while, the words almost mocking. No audience. As if she finally understood that her treatment of me only made sense when there were eyes watching. As if one quiet dinner could undo years of turning me into a walking bit for her amusement. But something about it made me curious, because this wasn't her usual style. No texts, no control over how I'd react, just a quiet request. I went out to fix things, not because I missed her, but because a lingering part of me needed to witness if she even knew how to exist when she wasn't performing for an audience. She opened the door barefoot, wearing an old hoodie I hadn't seen in years. The one she used to wear on Sunday mornings when she still drank coffee in bed with me, idly watching dumb cooking shows. There was no makeup, no calculated posing, just her unadorned. The table was already set. No candles, no music, just pasta, 2 glasses of wine, and a silence that felt heavier, more oppressive than the very walls around us. We sat down. For a long time, neither of us spoke. She was the first to break it. I rewatched the video from the party. I raised an eyebrow. Someone had posted a story, she added. I saw myself, heard the way I spoke. It didn't sound like a joke anymore. I didn't respond. I wanted her to truly sit in it, to feel the weight of it. I sounded cruel, she whispered, like I forgot you were a person. Still, I said nothing. She pushed her plate away and looked at me, not for validation, but for something real. "You never explicitly told me you were unhappy." "No," I said, "I didn't. I thought if I remained silent long enough, perhaps you'd notice on your own." "And when I didn't," she pressed, "I realized I was training you how to treat me." I replied, the words tasting like ash. "Every time I laughed along, every time I stayed quiet, I told you it was okay to shrink me down in front of others." She wiped the corner of her eye and let out a shaky breath. "I didn't want to lose you." That's when I leaned back and said something that had been boiling in my chest for months. "You didn't lose me that night at the party. You lost me the precise moment you stopped protecting me when no one else was watching." Her face broke then, not dramatically, not with sobs or apologies, but like a mask, cracking, slow, and subtle. She had always been so polished, so rehearsed. But now, she looked achingly human, profoundly vulnerable. And oddly, I felt no hatred, no bitterness, only a deep, pervasive weariness. "You were never the joke," she said quietly. "No," I said, "but you turned me into one anyway." We didn't talk about getting back together. We didn't talk about divorce. We simply sat with the wreckage between us, finally acknowledging its stark reality. And maybe that's all we ever needed. Not more jokes, not more pretending, just the truth. And that night when I left, she didn't try to stop me. She just stood there in the doorway watching the authentic version of me she'd never truly known finally walk away. The morning after that dinner, I took a long walk along the river trail behind my building. It used to be our place. We'd go there on slow Sundays, feeding ducks, pretending we were simpler people in a simpler marriage. But that morning, everything looked different, colder, sharper. I watched couples pass, hands clasped, heads leaning together, and I couldn't help but wonder how many of them were merely pretending too. I wondered how many of them were one joke away from falling apart. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from her. "Thank you for coming. I hope you know I meant what I said." I didn't reply. There was nothing more to say. And yet, she kept messaging. Not desperate, not angry. Just these strange little attempts to rebuild something she didn't even understand she had broken. A photo of her dog, curled up with my old hoodie. A reminder about a dentist appointment I'd long since forgotten. Even a song, one we used to dance to, barefoot, in the kitchen before dinner. I deleted each one as it came, not out of spite, but out of mercy for both of us. She didn't get it. She still clung to the belief that this was reparable, that perhaps enough dinners, or shared memories, or quiet texts, could somehow coax me back to that old version of myself, the one who smiled through the discomfort, laughed through the humiliation, stayed even when he felt completely unseen. But I had changed, slowly, irrevocably, silently, not because I yearned to become someone else, but because I could no longer afford to keep being the person I was with her. A few days later, I received a box. No note, just a small cardboard box left outside my door. Inside lay a bundle of items. An old hoodie of mine she used to borrow, a photo strip from our second anniversary, the cracked mug I kept on my nightstand, and tucked underneath it all, the book I gave her when she got promoted. Quiet, The Power of Introverts. I remember inscribing it with, "So you'll remember to hear the ones who don't shout." I stared at that inscription for a long time. It felt like a poignant letter from my past self, sent forward into this moment, perhaps to hurt me, or perhaps, finally, to set me free. I didn't cry. I didn't even sigh. I just repacked the box and set it on my closet shelf, not to forget it, but to remember why I walked. Later that evening, I ran into Alara's sister at a grocery store. She saw me, paused, then offered a sad little smile. "She's not doing great," she said. I nodded, but didn't ask for details. "I didn't want them," she added. "She keeps saying you left without a warning, that you just